All right, hello there. So today we're going to have a look. It's a bit of an unusual one. We're going to have a look at computer ethics. Okay. Ethics in computer science. Okay. So we look at it from a couple of different angles. Okay. So I suppose the first angle we're going to look at it from is the angle of green computing. Okay. So what do we mean by green computing? Well, we mean computing that that leaves a minimum impact on the environment. Okay. So we'll think about the positive and negatives. Okay. I'll use a plus IVE for positive and a minus IVE. So one positive, okay, yeah, less paper is being used because of computers. Simple as that. Okay. You're going to have less paper happening. Okay, that's good for the environment. Another positive that's happening is well, we can see it right now, work from home. Okay. There's less people working in offices. That means less offices need to be built. You got the whole thing. You need less public transport. You have less cars on the road. All those things you have to take into account. Now, you could have spin negatives on all them, but for the moment, let's consider them all them positives. Okay. So it's another positive. A negative, I suppose, is energy for computing. And usually the main point of contention there would be not so much the energy being used in the household, but by the industry. So for every website, you need a server. For every piece of data, you need a server. And servers consume tremendous amounts of energy. It's been predicted that within the next 20 years, 30% of Ireland's electrical output will be used to run data centers. That's the quantities of energy we're talking about. Okay, so they're very high end in terms of the demand that they have. So there's a couple of the other negative, I suppose. The other big negative is the raw materials. I'm not just talking about the aluminium casing or your plastic casing. They're not the big ones. We're talking about the gold, the lithium for the batteries, all those rare earth elements that are used in the different components. Unfortunately, the majority of them are found in third world countries, and you get big companies coming in and they'll do deals with the local governments who don't tend to be the most environmentally conscious governments, where they'll just strip mine and they'll do God tolls all and pay dirt cheap wages just to get the stuff out. And then you have the waste, because while all this stuff goes into a computer, it's still in that computer when the computer gets turned away. So it can be recycled and it's worth recycling. Okay. But the problem is it's not worth recycling in a first world country because the wages are too high. So all this stuff gets shipped off to third world countries again, the very places we got these elements and these materials from, and they they upcycle, recycle, and of course, when you're taking all these stuff out, you've also got waste that they have nothing to do with it. A lot of this waste will be hazardous waste, especially from batteries and stuff like that. And then when they get all these materials out, they have to be refined in order to be used again. And again, you're talking about the refining process for these can be very nasty in terms of the chemicals that are needed in order to refine some of these elements. So that's a big negative when you think of it from that end. Okay, so that's the green computing end of it. Then I suppose there's the privacy end, the big one, the one that kind of everyone really talks about. So I might as well talk about and get it out of the way. First of all, we have a number of issues. The right to be forgotten. That's a European right where if you've done something nasty, dodgy, and it's all over the internet, after a certain amount of time, you have the right to apply to Google or whoever search engines in order to suppress the searches for what you've done when you've done your crime and done your time. So a fellow who's murdered 20 people and gets out after 40 years, he has the right to say to Google, whether Google do it or not, they can apply to a court to say, no, it's too much in the public interest. But it's the right for them to say, well, you can't type my name in anymore, and it's the first thing you see. So the right to be begotten, it's a dodgy one, that one. It's one that you could talk an awful lot about. Data. Who owns it? You don't pay for TikTok. You don't pay for WhatsApp. You don't pay for Facebook. You don't pay for Instagram. So when you don't pay for something, you become the product, not the thing you've downloaded, but you. So it is a case that they are taking data. Okay. Now, the European Union has brought in certain legislation like GDPR, which limits the amount of data that they can take without your permission. The problem is that the very first thing you do when you download this is they ask for please allow me permission to access your text, access your location, access your this, that, and the other. If you click no to all them, then you can't download it. So it's a case of chicken and egg. If you want to use our product, you have to accept all our terms and conditions, including taking data from you. Blah blah blah. So there are limits to that, but that's generally it. Now, this can come into the fore because people, despite what you think, trust these companies more than they trust their government with their data. And we saw that recently with the biometric data that the government wanted to imprint on the government's user service card, where you had to have a card if you wanted to access certain things like social welfare, certain payments. And the data commissioner, the person who's in charge of protecting data in Ireland, said that this was not a valid use of the data, and people did not trust the government with this data because they were afraid what else they might do with it. So this is something that will become a big problem. For example, you might know it, but by signing up to particular websites, you could be selling the data to other companies that you might need. For example, let's say you want to apply for health insurance, and you tick the health insurance and it says, I do not smoke and I do not drink. And then the health insurance gets your email address. There's a quick scan using some AI, and it finds out that on Facebook, you've been tagged in 15 different pubs and at 2 different, and your credit card shows that you're buying, packets of 20 carols every day. So you have to be aware of how you're cross-pollinating your data, So for privacy purposes, you should never mix your data streams. If you're working, it should be on a totally different device than the one you would use for home, and neither the twin should ever meet. Okay, you should have a home phone, a phone that you use for you and for all your personal stuff, and a work phone. And it's as simple as that. You should never have the 2 of them on the same device, just to separate the chances of cross-pollination of data between the 2. Okay, so privacy is a massive issue. Okay, and as generations start to follow up from this generation onwards, privacy will become narrower and narrower because everything gets put on the internet, and because nothing ever disappears from the internet, it's always there for someone to find, no matter what it is. It brings up a lot of legal and ethical issues around the idea of privacy and what it really means in terms of both your personal privacy and the privacy of the data that you hand out. That's another kind of big area of it. Another one is information. Now, why is this different than data? Well, this has come up big time recently, and I suppose this is probably something with the recent unpleasantness in America. Okay, Parlor was a alternate to Facebook and Twitter that was used by particular sections of the American population. Okay, and Parlor is hosted by Amazon on one of its servers, and the app is listed on both the App Store and the Play Store. And all 3 of them decided they were taking Parlor down off their respective sites. So Parlor couldn't have a server on Amazon anymore. It couldn't have its app to be downloaded on either of the 2 main app downloading sites. So the question becomes Parler did nothing wrong in itself. It's just what it is. It's a free speech, apparently, app. Okay. But because those three companies didn't agree with what Parler or the people on Parler were talking about, they decided to take them off. Now, it's well within their rights. But the question becomes, once companies get so big that they can decide who can speak and who can't speak, then is there a need for those companies to be broken up so they don't have that power into smaller companies so they can compete better? Okay, so that's something to do, with the flow of information, how it's controlled. Okay, there are very sophisticated algorithms and programs out there now that can scrape through the internet and find out exactly what your opinion is based on what you posted on various websites. It's very hard to be hidden unless you are very, very careful. So information and its control and its use and its value is an ethical issue that has to be thought of. There are pros and cons to each element. The whole point of the World Wide Web is it has allowed groups, small groups, that would normally be suppressed in a larger society to flourish and to get their message out. Now, in a lot of cases, it's a positive thing. Think of countries where you have despotic leaders and a small group of people who want freedom are able to get their word and their pictures out to the world. Videos of atrocities, videos of police brutality, videos of rioting, they can't be suppressed anymore. They get out, they get free. It's very hard to control that information. Even in countries which are very good at it, for example, China, North Korea, you can still get the data out. Okay, it still can be done. Okay, so issues around information are very, very key. Okay, the other issue is, and it's one again most people don't really think about, is copyright and patents. So remember, a patent is a recipe. It's your recipe, and you have to provide it to a patent office in order for your recipe to be secure and no one else can take your recipe. The problem is with a patent is the minute you give that recipe out, it can be copied. Now, you could sue because you're not meant to be copying my recipe, but, you can only sue someone so far until, they eventually just ignore you. Copyright is a major issue, and we've seen this come up with things like YouTube, where they've clamped down very much on people using other people's content, even if it's for very simple reasons. So, for example, if I was playing in the background of this video a copyrighted piece of music, something, I don't know, grime or drum and bass or something. I don't know what you're into now, lads, but it'd flag straight away on YouTube, and I'd either be asked to take it down or pay a fee to use the music. Now, you might think that's fair enough, okay? But at what point does copyright stop? For example, right now, if I want to review a movie on YouTube or online or something, I can say whatever I want about that movie. But what happens if copyright gets so far that I can't show any clips from that movie, or I can't mention certain names of that movie because they are copyrighted? They can't use those names without. So you can see that where this can tumble down, okay, down a very steep rabbit hole. Okay, so there's two issues in computer science that do come into play quite a lot. I suppose the biggest kind of area of computer's ethics is around AI. Okay, so there's a lot of things people think of AI, but I'm just going to give you a quick kind of, it's an umbrella term. In reality, it is. Okay, the whole point of AI is to basically harness the power of computers and data in useful ways, supposedly. Okay, it's sometimes divided into two kind of subcategories. One's narrow AI, and one's general AI. Okay, so narrow AI is where you build computers and computer systems that carry out very, very specific tasks or sets of tasks. Okay, whereas general AI is more general. It's more broad ranging in terms of the complexities of what it does. Okay, in either way, AI's purpose is to try to mimic human intelligence. Okay, so we can simulate things in our brain. We can mimic things we see in nature. We can augment our physical status using tools and stuff like that. And AI attempts to recreate that using algorithms, heuristic programming, physical, built robotic systems, you name it, AI things to do it. Now, it is probably going to be the biggest area in terms of ethical issues. Okay, so if you bear with me, we'll just quickly go through some of the positives. Okay, AI can be used to, track criminals. It can predict where you're most likely to have a murder, a robbery, a rape, you name it. Okay, it'll look at all the data, it'll crunch the numbers, it'll look at things like population dynamics, population, socioeconomic backgrounds, all that, and it can predict pretty accurately. Okay, the problem with AI, if you use it in that way, is that at the back end of AI, it's still programmed by a human being. Human beings have fallacies, have biases towards other human beings. And sometimes subconsciously, these things get built into AI, so you don't realize that it's happening that way. Another example would be AIs could replace doctors in the morning in terms of diagnosing disease. They could. If you could feed in all the symptoms for a disease into an AI, you would probably get a very, very accurate diagnosis. Okay? The problem becomes this. An AI wouldn't be able to then tell that, you know what, you've only got so many months to live, go off and see the world and enjoy it with your family. Or, you know what, you haven't got long to live, but if we give this a chance, you might get another 2 years out of it. It doesn't have that ability to nuance the results. It can only give you what it sees. So that does become a problem. Humans, at the end of the day, can make decisions and can bring in empathy. They can bring in non-logical thinking, asymmetric thinking. That's very hard for an AI to do. Not impossible, but very hard to do it all the time. So that does become an ethical issue at the end of it. There is a very famous scientist slash writer, okay, called Isaac Asimov. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of him, but Isaac Asimov back in the 1950s postulated 3 laws that would govern robots, sentient robots, AIs, this whole thing, okay? And he basically came up with 3 laws. And the first law said that a robot, and again, back then it was a robot, but you could apply it to an AI. A robot cannot injure a human or through inaction allow one to be harmed. Okay, so that makes sense if you think about it. Okay, so robot can't harm a human, fair enough, and it also can't stand by and allow a human to be harmed. The second law, okay, robots must follow human orders except if it violates Rule 1. That makes sense. Robots, you must do what I tell you, except if I tell you to do something that violates Order 1 or Rule 1. And the third one, okay, robots must protect themselves except if it violates rules 1 and 2. So in other words, robots, take care of yourselves, but if we tell you to do something, you still have to do it, even if that means not taking care of yourself. Okay, now He made those laws a long time ago, but they're as valid today, especially as we get closer to the point at which we allow artificial intelligence to make decisions which will impact on human lives. And I'm particularly thinking here of very sophisticated drones. As we know, drones have become ubiquitous in modern warfare. But at the end of each drone, there's still a person flying that drone and making that decision to kill. So the robotics laws are not broken there, okay? But will there come a point in the future where this won't be? Because there surely have to be points where, let's say the drone is flying and it goes into a dark zone where you can't connect with it. Does he have to turn back, or do you allow an onboard AI system follow through with the orders to either kill or not kill? Okay, so at that point, these come into play. Okay, because if you're allowing an algorithm, if you're allowing an AI, whatever, to make a decision based on particular parameters, what happens if the parameters change? So let's say, let's say drone is on its own. You've lost contact, but he still has the target in his sights. There's the target in the car. Okay, now if the man was there at the other end watching through the drone's eye, he'd see that the car has just stopped because, a group of school children are crossing the road. However, the man is not there. So the AI only understands car, target. It's easier to kill target if target is not moving. Target hasn't stopped moving, kill target. The problem is you shoot, blow, you kill all the children. Person with a drone watching from the other end might say, okay, he stopped. We've got a good chance, but wait a second, there's children here. Okay, what's our rules of engagement? Do not harm civilians. Okay, there you go. Bing, bang, boom. So these are the ethical issues that are going to start coming up. And you have to be able to talk about it in computer science. You have to be able to formulate different pros and cons to each different argument that's put in front of you. I've only put a few of them in front of you here, but there are a lot of them. Now, a lot of them come down to personal freedom versus the freedom of the group. Okay, what's better for you? And as the words of a great man, the needs of the many greatly outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Okay, that's one way of thinking about it. Okay, the other way of thinking about it is, so long suckers, I'm on my own. The rest you can go to hell, type of thing. So there are those two kind of balances: the individuality of humans versus the collective good of the group. Okay, so it's just something to think of. It's a nice one to sign off on the week. Take care. Goodbye.